When you spend 2 decades wearing a motorcycle club patch, serving in leadership, and half a century raised in the life, among some of the largest organizations on record, there are several life lessons to be learned. This is one of those lessons. In episode 2 of this podcast series, The Club Life Lessons, titled 12 Felonies, I spoke of how when participating in heinous activities, even if unintended, the consequences can still be severe. I ended the episode by telling listeners that the 12 felony charges were dropped by the prosecutor's office at pretrial, but that I had learned a valuable lesson with regard to how I should handle situations like that in the future. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. In fact, the ripples of that incident would redirect my entire path in the club life. Since I was born into and predominantly raised around the motorcycle club community, I thought of it as family. I'm afraid for the most part I was really only exposed heavily to the good side of the life, not the bad side. Unfortunately, those lessons I would have to learn on my own. I think the worst kind of betrayal is the one that comes from within your own family, because generally that's the kind of betrayal you would never expect or see coming. As I have previously mentioned, the particular club that I was in during that time was an affiliate to a much larger one-percenter club that are very well known. When I was elected the president of that organization, I was among the third-generation leadership of the World Mother Chapter since inception. Although we were our own independent international motorcycle club, with our own set of bylaws and rules, the one-percenter nation that we were born of still had tremendous influence over our club. In part for good reason, because we were a non-diamond affiliated club who represented their very well-known and long-historied club. Very soon after my trial had ended, I received a call from one of my closest brothers who was in that one-percenter club. We'll just call him Smiles, even though that wasn't his name. At the time that I prospected for my club, we shared a clubhouse with the local chapter of the one-percenter club. When I was coming up as a new prospect for my club, Smiles was also prospecting for the one-percenter club at the same time. So we became pretty much thick as thieves, and even closer brothers over those following few years after. In fact, many who knew me from the club life knew me to only wear KD old school biker sunglasses. Well, Smiles was the reason for that, because when we both earned our patches for our clubs, he gave me as a gift my first pair of KD sunglasses, and I never stopped wearing KDs after that. Smiles had risen fairly quickly in the ranks of their organization, and at the time was an enforcer. When Smiles called me and invited me to lunch at Hooters, I honestly didn't give it much thought other than I was happy to be able to see my brother. Unfortunately, the conversation did not go anything like I had expected. He told me that I was being removed from the position of president of my club. He said that it was the opinion of the leadership of the one-percenter club that I had really fucked up that situation by involving another club to handle their own business, and that it could have been really bad for everyone. I said, "Hold up there, brother. First and foremost, they don't run our organization. We do. Secondly, I was advised by your leadership specifically about the club that I had involved, that we were to show them the utmost courtesy possible and treat them just like they were a member of your one-percenter club. And lastly, the only person charged and was looking at 36 years in prison was me, and I went clear to pretrial, not having or any intention of having any negotiation with the prosecutor, and I never said a word to anyone about anyone else regarding that situation." He said, "Yes, they know that you didn't talk, and that is very righteous. And also, the reason they're allowing you to stay in your club and not just be bounced out. But I am to be clear in that you don't really have a choice." Well, let me tell you something, folks. That was a dagger to the heart. They knew I had worked my ass off to build our club in support of their patch all over this nation. In fact, the very small town that Smiles hailed from, with his help, I had opened a new chapter and clubhouse, which sometime after had evolved into a new clubhouse and chapter for their one-percenter club. I had just opened a brand new chapter with 19 new members that I had personally recruited, and a legal bar business in my own hometown, which was also where this incident had occurred. I said, "Well, what will become of the chapter that I just opened in my hometown, and the bar business?" And he said, "You don't have to worry about that. We'll run the new chapter until it gets on its feet." So I also told him, "Brother, that isn't going to work because the person that leased me their business and their state liquor license had specifically asked that I give her my word that I would not allow the One Percenter organization to take over her bar, due to the obviously known issues that could arise from that. And even more importantly than that my wife and myself had personally signed on to guarantee on that lease and legal contract due to the state regulations of having a liquor license. He said, "I don't know what to tell you, but this is what's going to happen." He said, "You're going back to the mother chapter, not as the president, but his boss says you're nothing, just as a regular member." He could tell that I was furious, and I knew this was not anything he had ever planned that he would have to do. I just looked at him and said, "Brother, this is so fucked up on so many levels." He was just staring down at the table and said, "I'm really sorry, T." I just got up and left. Talk about being put in the middle of a rock and a hard place. I loved my club. I worked hard for my patch, not just to earn it, but to keep it. I spilled blood for this patch, alongside some of the best brothers I've ever had. But my word is my word, and I had given her my word that I would not allow this to happen. I mean, anyone would understand if I had to go back to her and said, "Look, this wasn't my idea. They are who they are. What am I supposed to do? I don't really have a choice." But everyone knows that's not me, and there is always a choice. This happened on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, I can't remember. So I contemplated about it a couple of days and didn't speak to anyone, and finally came up with a determination of what I had to do. I knew that the One Percenter Club had a mandatory regional meeting out of state that upcoming weekend, so I called a mandatory meeting of all members between the local chapters on Saturday to the bar chapter. I waited till the very last minute to show up to the meeting. While most of the guys were already upstairs in the clubhouse, and I came from the parking lot and went straight up to the meeting. A few instantly noticed that I wasn't wearing my vest nor colors, but no one said anything, they just stared. I called the meeting to order and then broke them the news that I had to leave the club due to extenuating circumstances that were beyond my control. This obviously came as a shock to everyone in the room. I apologized to them for having to fail them, but again it was beyond my control. I said, "I'm going to excuse myself from this meeting. You guys need to discuss amongst yourself." I left who I had picked as the future president of that chapter in charge and said, "When you leave, any property here that belongs to the club, take it with you, because this is no longer a clubhouse." And I walked out the door. The only phone call I'd had that weekend from the One Percenter Club, who had been on the road, was from a 40-plus year member whom I respected. I sat at the kitchen table and probably talked to him for an hour and a half. He didn't try to talk me into staying or anything like that. We just talked, and I'm forever grateful for that talk. The only other conversation happened just a couple days later when I was at the bar. I had anticipated there would be some blowback, and now everyone was suspect. It was summertime, so we often left the bar front door open to the street, and I saw someone standing outside on the sidewalk, but at the doorway, and it was Smiles. He said, "Hey T, can we talk?" I was standing behind the bar, hand on my hip in case I need to take a picture, and I said, "Don't you dare step foot across that door threshold, or I'll blow you back out into the street." And he said, "I know, that's why I'm asking if you could come outside and talk to me." And I said, "I'll come out front and talk to you on the sidewalk, but just know it ain't going to end well for anyone playing games." There was one of my club members that was with him, and I suspected prior that little bitch had been telling them everything that had been going on in our churches, and he was telling them everything that had to do with the bar. Because he thought he was buying himself favor in their club by being a little snitch bitch, I had assumed that, and now I knew for sure. So I told Smiles, "You tell that motherfucker back there that he better get out of my sight, because no matter what happens with me and you, I'll take his fucking head off." So the snitch bitch slinked around the corner to where their bikes were, and I didn't see him again. On a side note, the snitch bitch did end up patching with them later on, but didn't make it all that long. As far as what I was told, he is out bad. Anyways, Smiles was just looking at me and he's like, "What the fuck, T? Holy shit, you can't quit. You are that club." I said, "No. Remember what your boss said? I'm nobody. You told me I didn't have any option, and I showed you that I did." He started to say, "Come on, brother, you know better than that. Maybe I didn't say it right," and I cut him off. I said, "Don't you dare apologize to me. You are a motherfucking one percenter, and you did what your boss told you to do, and there is no shame in that. In fact, you know me well enough to know if you didn't do your job, I would not respect you for it." He just looked at the ground and he's like, "Yeah, but brother." I said, "Brother, it'll be all right, but just tell them this. If they come at me, they better kill me, because if not, I will return the favor 10 times over." He shook my hand and gave me a hug, and I didn't talk to him for at least a year after that. Within a short time, more than half of that new chapter had turned their patches in, and 6 of those new prospective members that I had personally recruited and were friends prior for many years joined me in a corporation at the bar, and we ran it together. This was the first major shakeup in my patched club life, and it was a painful lesson. Unfortunately, it would not be the last. Once the word got out on the street, even the head of the gang task force from 2 counties came by the bar and asked if I was okay, because they fully expected a major retribution coming at me. It took me probably 2 years to fully understand what had happened and why. It had nothing to do with my actions or that other club that we contacted the night of the incident. It had everything to do with the fact that I had obtained a legal cash cow bar business with a liquor license and a clubhouse upstairs. So hey, at least it wasn't personal. I ran into Smiles a little over a year later, and he asked why I didn't come down to any of their events. I said, "Well, I kind of figured they might be mad at me." And he said, "Ah, hell, T, we thought you were mad at us." Unfortunately, we could never be as close as we once were, because we no longer shared that patch. But we did remain friends up until his death, roughly 5 or 6 years ago. I'll never forget, probably 16 years ago, we were at the clubhouse on a Friday night, and he was bugging out to head back to his hometown to see his son. It was just me and him, and we were shooting the shit, and he said, "I need to get home to see the boy, because I want to spend time with him when I can, because I doubt I'll ever live long enough to see him graduate high school." I said, "Well, that sucks." Well, he did make it at least that long. Gone but not forgotten. I miss you, brother. And I'm still rocking those KDs. But then again, I'm just Tabasco the Biker. What the hell do I know? Keep it real.
In the club life you get one shot to prove that you're a man.